So I left my office. I started to head towards the Capitol. Fortunately, I got frantic texts from people saying, don't go into the Capitol. It is being overrun. At that point, some of us turned back. We were told that the Cannon building was clear, but we didn't know, but it was our best course. So I went to my office, locked the doors of the office, and stayed in the office the rest of the day.
So, Congressman Khanna, you have the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, calling for the removal of President Trump. Can you talk about the different options? Can you talk about what the 25th Amendment invocation would mean? Can you talk about what impeachment would look like?
Well, the 25th Amendment, Amy, is something that Vice President Pence can do. He just needs to get a majority of the cabinet on board, and they can ask that the president be removed, and Vice President Pence then can become president. If they refuse to do that, then the House must impeach and the Senate should convict. Here's why Republicans should be for impeachment. If you listen to the president's incitement of violence and Rudy Giuliani's incitement of violence, the target was actually Republican lawmakers. Donald Trump Jr. is saying, go show the Republicans they need to be on our side, and we're going to have a trial by combat. So this was not an attack just on Democratic lawmakers. If anything, it was an incitement of violence against Republican lawmakers.
Inside the Capitol, as the marauders smashed their way in, as ultimately 5 people died, a woman apparently trying to get in through a window was shot, it looks like, by Capitol Police. Now a Capitol Police officer has succumbed to his injuries, apparently slammed in the head by a fire extinguisher, and 3 others who died of medical emergencies on the Capitol grounds. Describe the feeling inside. Did you ever expect this would happen? President Trump's whole family was at the rally. You had Ivanka Trump, you had Eric, you had Donald Trump calling for people to move forward. Trump said he would go with them to the Capitol. Of course, he didn't. And what that means, do you see him as the leader of the insurrection? And do you think he should be criminally charged? He's out of office in less than 2 weeks if he's not ousted before.
Well, it is a case of classic incitement. It is illegal conduct to encourage people to go break the law. And in this case, there was a direct connection. It's not like he made some generic call for protesting. What he said is go march at the Capitol. Rudy Giuliani is saying it's a trial by combat. He's saying go show strength. This is basically an incitement of a mob to go commit criminal attacks. And so it absolutely needs to be investigated from a Justice Department perspective. But the first thing is he needs to be removed from office. I don't understand how you can have a president of the United States who has incited a violent attack remain in office any longer.
Do you support impeachment or the invoking of the 25th Amendment?
I support both. I mean, I support whatever will get him out. What I don't understand is why you can't have McConnell call him and say, President Trump, if you don't resign, you're going to be impeached. And that is necessary not just for the stability of our democracy until Joe Biden gets into office. That's necessary to send a message that in this country, you cannot incite riots and have no consequences. I mean, what does it say to people if we have a president of the United States who's incited violence against the institution of the Capitol, and we say we're fine with him still being president of this country? That is not a message that stands up for democratic values.
Contrast this with President Trump's approach in Portland, Oregon, when he called for people put in jail for up to 10 years if they in any way damaged federal property. Here, as we saw people smashing the windows of the Capitol, climbing through those windows, you have President Trump safely at the White House saying, "We love you."
Well, his speech was reminiscent of Mark Antony's speech and Julius Caesar, minus Shakespeare's rhetorical genius, where he was basically manipulating people saying, okay, go home. But really the thrust of the speech was, we love you, we support you, I support what you're doing. And it was further inciting this violence. But you're right, Amy, to point out the racial disparity. I mean, I don't think there's a person in this country who believes that there were thousands of Black Lives Matter protesters or Black protesters there, that the response wouldn't have been dramatically different. And that is something this country really needs to grapple with, the disparity in which we looked at white protesters for Trump and the way we looked at many African-American protesters during this summer who were protesting for racial justice.
Forget thousands of Black Lives Matter activists. If 12 announced they were going to march on the Capitol and they were going to storm it, not to mention just protest in front of it, I dare say there would be a massive response. And that goes to the question, I mean, this wasn't like a flash mob where suddenly, you know, these people emerged. President Trump had been calling for this for weeks. The mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, already had written a letter to the Pentagon asking for the National Guard to come in. How is it possible that the Capitol Police were not only so completely unprepared, but actually we see the high-fiving, we see the selfies, we see the removal of the barricades, ushering people in. Now you have the resignation of the chief of the Capitol Police and the ousting of the sergeants of arms of both the Senate and the House.
Well, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. I agree with you that the Capitol Police acted in a way that was completely unprepared, and these incidents of taking selfies and letting people in are very troubling. I do think we need to acknowledge that there were a lot of first-line responders and police officers who I personally saw who were doing the right thing, who were risking their own lives to protect people in the Capitol. But the leadership was totally derelict. They did not have a plan. They did not take the proper precautions. And of course, Washington, D.C. was restricted. It's why we needed to become a state, because they couldn't invoke the National Guard. The final point, Emily, is that social media really needs to be looked at. This whole attack was being planned on Parler. People were actually talking about how they were going to get rifles. They were talking in specifics about what they were going to do. And nothing came down on those sites. And then Facebook and Twitter were live streaming the calls to go march on the Capitol. So I think social media has to really, probably one of its most shameful days in contributing to what happened on the Capitol.
And you have the newly sworn-in Democratic Congressmember Cori Bush of Missouri tweeting, "My first resolution in Congress will be to call for the expulsion of the Republican members of Congress who incited this domestic terror attack on the Capitol." This is Cori Bush speaking on MSNBC Wednesday.
I'm walking through from the Capitol to my office, and there was not a lot of police activity. There was no one came to this door to check and knocked on the door to say, "Congressman Bush, are you and your team okay?" You know, we're sending text messages letting people know, I'm letting, you know, our committees know we're okay, letting our other members know we're okay. You know, something had to happen, because I tell you what, the National Guard, when they were called to Ferguson or any other part in St. Louis, that was not a thing. We didn't have to wait to find out that was happening. Oftentimes that happened even when it was said that we were having a protest. So I don't understand how this happened like this. I don't understand how we were put in this position in our place of business. Our lives were at risk today.
That's Missouri Congressmember Cori Bush. And I'm wondering, Congressmember Khanna, if you were among the lawmakers who are demanding the resignation of Republican Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, blaming them for helping instigate the violent mob of Trump supporters that stormed the Capitol. Cruz and Hawley were at the forefront of the efforts objecting to the certification of the electoral votes for President-elect Joe Biden. Congressmembers Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted yesterday, "Senator Cruz, you must accept responsibility for how your craven, self-serving actions contributed to the deaths of 4 people yesterday and how you fundraised off this riot. Both you and Senator Hawley must resign. If you do not, the Senate should move for your expulsion." unquote. Meanwhile, publishing company Simon & Schuster said Thursday it's canceling the publication of an upcoming book by Senator Hawley, and Senator Hawley's home newspaper, the Kansas City Star, has said he has blood on his hands. Even after everything happened, Hawley insisted on continuing to object to the counts in Pennsylvania, for example. Your response?
Well, Amy, I think what Hawley did is unconscionable. I mean, he actually was out there with a fist pump, supporting and encouraging directly the protesters, and so resignation in that sense makes complete sense. And there should be an ethics investigation. I think there has to be a distinction between members of Congress, as much as I disagreed with them, who used the process to raise objections, and they should be defeated at the ballot box. But if there were senators like Hawley who are actually inciting violence, that breaks all ethics laws, and that is the grounds for expulsion. And that fact-based investigation should take place. In Hawley's case, I think it's clear and evident.
Finally, through all of this, it almost became a sideshow. But Wednesday began and ended with history being made in Georgia. The first African-American Democrat elected to the Senate from the South, Reverend Raphael Warnock. That was the beginning in the early hours. And then you had, in the midst of all of this, the announcement that, that John Ossoff had won the second seat in Georgia, flipping the U.S. Senate to being Democrat-led, at least 50-50. And, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris will be the deciding vote. What does that mean for you in the House and the kind of legislation you want to see put forward?
It's absolutely historic. We now can get things done, like a $15 minimum wage, like a major infrastructure bill, like $2,000 cash for people who need it. This is a moment now that we have to deliver for the American people whose wages have stagnated, who have not had good, secure jobs. But more than that, Amy, is it's a step after all this country has gone through towards a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. We have a new South with Reverend Warnock, not just an African-American senator from the South, but an African-American senator who ran talking about criminal justice, who ran talking about human rights in Palestine, who ran talking about issues of economic dignity. It is a new voice for this country, and I am hopeful that we're going to turn a page after Donald Trump and start the serious work of building that kind of a democracy.
Khanna, I want to thank you for being with us.